prosperity in every part of the country. It is shameful that they have actually worked very actively to ensure that workers have no voice in this conversation.
Questions of the Honourable Member for Calgary Centre.
Madam Speaker, and it's something that's been in floor of this House of Commons, been in front of committee, but there has been a moving target here on this, particularly with the Supreme Court's reading on the Impact Assessment Act that has reopened this as far as whether there is any validity to this law whatsoever, or if we're going to just end up putting the country into another couple of years of actual legal morass where nothing gets done here. Nothing gets done for any workers in Canada, nothing gets done for any projects in Canada, nothing gets done for any provinces in Canada, nothing gets done in Canada. And this government is happy with that. This government is used to that. This government has created that atmosphere across this country. And that's what has to stop in this country, Madam Speaker. The fact that we can actually get things done here again. This is one more laden bill that basically says we don't want anything to happen in Canada, but don't worry, workers, we're on your side, even though you won't have any jobs at the end of our agenda here. It's a ridiculous scenario. We need to have it examined clearly in this House of Commons, particularly in respect to the new laws that have come down, interpretations from the Supreme Court of Canada, to see if this is actually legitimate legislation in the first place, Madam Speaker. Can the minister stand up and tell us if he's actually got anything resembling an advance ruling on this?
Right. Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, I would say that my honourable colleague clearly has not read the bill. What the bill is a transparency mechanism that establishes a partnership council that is of labour, industry, Indigenous peoples and youth to provide advice to the government on how we actually work together to build an economy that's going to create jobs and economic prosperity. There is nothing across jurisdictions in the bill, and I would invite my honourable colleague to read it. But I would also say, and I will quote, "The Sustainable Jobs Act represents an important opportunity for Canada to shape our future and create jobs by providing the resources that the world needs, including energy, food and minerals." That is the President of the Business Council of Alberta.
There you go.
The Honourable Member, l'Honourable Député Jonquière.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will take this opportunity to ask the Minister a question. I agree with him that it's very unfortunate what we've seen at the Natural Resources Committee recently. However, in Bill C-50, unfortunately, the government has not taken into consideration that there's an agreement between Quebec and Ottawa, a labour agreement. Something needs to be done about this. I'd like to hear from the Minister if he agrees that these workforce training agreements made in the past between Ottawa and Quebec must be taken into consideration. Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The bill seeks to better position the government so it can take more effective measures in areas of federal jurisdiction. It will allow the provinces to work within their jurisdiction. We will continue to cooperate closely with the provinces and territories, including Quebec.
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you. Throughout this time that we've been at committee, in fact, we are still on the same meeting that began on October 30th, and we have heard all sorts of conversations about strawberry milkshakes being drunk through straws and muscle cars. But what we haven't actually had is an opportunity to hear from workers about what their perspectives are on the Sustainable Jobs Act. And I was wondering if perhaps the minister could help us to have a better perspective from his conversations with organised labour over the past 6 weeks about how they're feeling about the delays that we've been seeing in committee and what they're hoping to see.
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. I would say that Labour and workers across the country are incredibly frustrated with the circus-type antics of the Conservative Party, holding up discussion and debate, holding up and preventing witnesses from appearing before the committee. The President of the Canadian Labour Congress recently said, by holding up this bill continuously, the Conservatives are not speaking for workers on this issue. They are not making sure workers have a choice or ability to have robust debate as they are holding up this bill. It's incredibly frustrating. It is disrespectful to workers who are worried about their futures, and it is disrespectful to communities. We need to see it stop.
That's a quote.
The Honourable Member for Fort McMurray, Cold Lake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is absolutely disrespectful that this government has decided that
instead of actually taking the time to have a conversation, they are just going to ram this bill through. This is not a just transition, but they've just decided to repurpose and change the names around. I represent thousands of energy workers in this strong province. And I often say, when Fort McMurray works, Alberta works. When Alberta works, Canada works. This piece of legislation is going to severely impact this ability. And for the government to now try and ram this piece of legislation through without actually having fulsome conversation and debate on this is absolutely disrespectful to the thousands of energy workers I represent and the thousands of energy workers that are throughout Canada. And I wonder why the minister is so afraid to have this conversation go so that we can actually have some conversation and some debate, and why they're deciding to instead ram closure down and shut down any form of debate on this bill. Thank you, Madam.
Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you very much. I mean, there's a lot of revisionist history in there. The committee has been blocked by the Conservative filibuster for 6 weeks. 11 meetings, about 25 hours. The committee has been stuck on the same meeting since October the 30th. The committee could have heard from witnesses on both bills, C-49 and C-50, that were in front of the committee, but the Conservatives blocked it. In terms of the work that we are doing to actually ensure that there is a prosperous future for every province and territory in this country, I would point the honourable member to the announcement of the $11.5 billion plant with Dow Chemicals in Fort Saskatchewan, where we worked collaboratively with the government of Alberta. The Air Products hydrogen facility near Edmonton, where we worked collaboratively with the government of Alberta. And the CCUS tax credit, where we've worked very collaboratively with the government of Alberta, which will create thousands of jobs going forward in that member's riding.
The Honourable Member for New Westminster Burnaby.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There are two bloc parties in this House of Commons. There's the Bloc Québécois and there's the Bloc Everything Party. I mean, the Conservatives have blocked every piece of legislation. Last Friday, they blocked the Canada-Ukraine trade deal. Now we see them blocking investments that would make a real difference in terms of clean energy and provide workers with more of a voice. We've seen them block as well dental care. We saw them block the grocery rebate. Everything that helps Canadians, Conservatives are there to block. And, Madam Speaker, it is simply untenable that over a 6-week period, Conservatives were blocking workers' representatives from testifying, refusing to let them speak, refusing to let them have that conversation about the bill. And now, with obviously not a single Conservative even having read the bill, we get all these kind of outlandish conspiracy theories rather than any sort of criticism about the bill itself. So my question to the Liberal minister who's before us now is, why do the Conservatives block everything that comes before the House? Why do they refuse? Why have they gone rogue? Why have they become so extremist under the member from Carleton?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you to the honourable member for the question. I mean, I think it's true that under the current leader of the Conservative Party, it's become the party of tear everything down. There is not one constructive suggestion that we see coming forward with the Conservative Party of Canada. Certainly, they have worked to ensure that there is no conversation about this bill. They have done the same thing with respect to the development of offshore wind. They would cancel the development of offshore wind in Atlantic Canada, which will create thousands and thousands of jobs and economic prosperity. They would cancel the Darlington Small Modular Reactor project with the government of Ontario. They would actually cancel the Volkswagen battery plant, which will create thousands of jobs. They would cancel many of the investment tax credits, so they would be canceling Dow and Air Products and a whole range of other things. I mean, at the end of the day, they need to find a pathway to actually have a constructive conversation about the environment and of the economy, not simply complaining with no constructive suggestions whatsoever.
L'honorable député de Jonquière.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I heard my colleague earlier say that there are two blocs here, the Bloc Québécois and the Bloc Everything Party, but I wouldn't support that thesis. I see two very well-defined trends at this time. There's the Bloc Québécois on the one hand, and on the other hand, there are three parties that stand up for oil companies with great fervor. Why do I say that, Madam Speaker? This bill initially was going to be about the just transition, a word that seemed a little bit too difficult for the government. They preferred to talk about sustainable jobs. We are the only country, I would say, in the West that wants to use the term sustainable jobs rather than the term just transition. Why? Because they're scared of Alberta's reaction. If they're scared of Alberta's reaction, it's because they don't have enough courage to take the necessary action to fight climate change. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources. Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's very important that we have a conversation about the future for an economy that will be prosperous and present in a low emissions future. And that is the conversation for sustainable jobs. This is something that's very important all over the country. And we are working together with the provinces and territories to build an economy that will be strong and prosperous in the future.
For Waterloo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it's indeed an honour and privilege to rise in this place and to be able to speak on behalf of the constituents of the riding of Waterloo. Just today I was meeting with Faith Climate Justice, a group who's really concerned about the future of the environment, the earth, as well as the economy. And they often ask about the work that we do in this place, and I had shared with them that I was actually at the Natural Resources Committee, and rather than debating and discussing important topics, including the future of Canadians and where they will work and how we take care of our environment, we got to see a show by conservative after conservative after conservative filibustering. And today we're hearing that they want to talk about it. And so what I would like to hear from the minister is, why are we having to use closure to actually get this legislation passed so that we can actually debate it, as well as what does this legislation mean for the future of the environment as well as the economy when it comes to Canadians? Thank you, Madam.
Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Good question. Thank you, Madame le Président, and thank you very much for the question. We are having to move towards closure because the committee has been blocked by a conservative filibuster, the behaviour of which Parliament has never seen. For 6 weeks, for 11 meetings, the committee has been stuck on the same meeting since October the 30th. There have been multiple witnesses that could have been called to actually have a robust conversation about this bill. The committee could have focused on trying to ensure that it was understanding and looking to ways in which to strengthen the bill, but instead we end up with not being able to have a conversation. This is a really important bill. Yes, it's important for us to take climate change seriously, to not deny the science of climate change, which some of my honourable colleagues in this House seem to do. But at the end of the day, it's critically important for us to move forward to build an economy that will be prosperous, will create thousands of good economic good jobs in every province and territory in Canada.
The Honourable Member for Coastal Bay Central Notre Dame.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Oil and gas workers like Luke and Steve in Coastal Bay Central Notre Dame put their faith in me in the last election. Yeah. Luke and Steve are 2 of the 5,500 that have been displaced in Newfoundland and Labrador's offshore oil and gas industry since this Liberal government turned on it and destroyed it. And now this piece of legislation is more of the same, to destroy the livelihoods of these people in my province. And I'm not going to take it, Madam Speaker. I'm here to represent them. And like guys like Luke and Steve would have came to committee and testified and gave their point of view after 20-odd years in the oil and gas industry, they would have spoke up for the people, that their peers, and they would have let this minister know exactly what this piece of legislation is going to do to them, and the suffering that they've endured by having to become rotational workers to leave their families. It's unbelievable, and now they're faced with more uncertainty.
That's right.
So will this minister have the guts to let this piece of legislation come before committee so stakeholders like Luke and Steve can come in and give their point of view, Madam Speaker?
Yeah.
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, thank you very much for the question. And yes, I would have welcomed having Luke and Steve come to the committee if the Conservatives had actually let any witnesses speak at the committee. So yes, that would have been very valuable, as well as having stakeholders from across the country have a conversation with MPs at the committee, as committees are actually supposed to do. But the committee was prevented from actually having any conversations because of a ridiculous filibuster by these Conservatives that have not allowed people in this House to do their jobs. Taxpayers should be angry, very angry at them for the waste of taxpayer money that we have seen. With respect to the oil and gas sector in Newfoundland and Labrador, that remains an important part of the Newfoundland economy. It will continue to be an important part of the Newfoundland economy. They have focused very much on decarbonization. It is actually some of the lowest carbon content oil that is produced anywhere in North America. It is certainly an important element, but there are others, like the development of offshore wind, which this member is opposing through the opposing C-49. And I would invite him to have a conversation with his premier when he's here tomorrow about his opposition to C-49.
That's a good idea.
The honourable member for Cloverdale, Langley City.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to rise and ask a question to the Minister. As a member of the Natural Resources Committee, I am one of those members who's been sitting for the last since October 30th, waiting to hear from witnesses, being able to call the Minister to speak about the importance of the legislation before us. I chaired the committee for 2 years, and we had many witnesses come and speak to us about the Sustainable Jobs study that we had going on. But we had the Conservatives, as my colleague from Timmins James Bay mentioned, filibustered the witnesses, the members of Labour, so we couldn't actually get testimony. We heard a Conservative colleague
Interrupt the honourable member to remind the honourable member for Calgary Signal Hill that we would like to hear the questions being asked and the answers being given. When someone is speaking, I would really appreciate it if people would keep quiet. Thank you. The honourable member for Cloverdale.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I was saying, as chair of the Natural Resources Committee, we've seen 3 iterations of Conservatives cycle through this committee to make sure that no work gets done. That included when we had the hearings on the Sustainable Jobs work. And the point is what the previous Conservative member asked a question about disrespect. I'd like the Minister to actually flip that to demonstrate that this is a very respectful piece of legislation for Labour. We know that the Conservatives stand up for big oil executives. Could he explain to the House and members of Cloverdale Langley City why Bill C-50 is so important and so needed?
The honourable member of the honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
It is incredibly important and needed because we are moving towards a low-carbon future. That is happening around the world, even if the Conservatives want to deny the reality of climate change. Everybody else around the world recognizes it and recognizes you can't have a plan for the economy that does not acknowledge the issue around moving towards a lower carbon future. At the end of the day, it's important that governments hear from various voices. The proposed partnership council that is part of the bill will have Labour representatives, industry representatives, Indigenous leadership, and youth to have a conversation and to help inform government policy about how we grow an economy that will be strong and prosperous going forward. And I just want to quote again, Madam Speaker, the president of the Business Council of Alberta. The Sustainable Jobs Act represents an important opportunity for Canada to shape our future and create jobs by providing the resources the world needs, including energy, food, and minerals. Thank you.
The honourable member for Timmins James Bay. Can we please keep quiet?
That's right, please.
Madam Speaker, I want to apologize to Luke and Steve. I mean, a year and a half, we had nobody from the Conservatives speaking for workers. They weren't interested in hearing workers. Now we're hearing about Luke.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Point of order. Inaudible. He's answering a question that was asked. Excuse me, why?
Timmins James Bay.
So now Luke and Steve are being conjured up by the Conservative member who's blocking offshore wind projects for Newfoundland and Labrador. And his colleagues, what were they talking about instead of talking about Luke and Steve? They were talking about their 70s muscle cars.
The honourable member, I have to interrupt the honourable member on a point of order from the honourable member for Coast of Bays, Central Notre Dame.
Madam Speaker, my honourable colleague is insinuating I'm lying. I'm conjuring up these names, Luke Jarvis and Steve D'Entremont, who's actually...
Wait, this is debate. I am going to let the honourable member finish his question.
I am apologizing to Luke and Steve for the fact that their Conservatives were bragging about 70s muscle cars. Talk about entitlement. While poor Luke and Steve are saying, how come that member that they voted for will not support offshore wind? Oh, no, not the Conservatives. They want to talk about 70s muscle cars. Talk about boomer entitlement. While we were talking about workers, while we were talking about offshore wind, they were talking about muscle cars. No wonder Luke and Steve are so upset and fed up with this Conservative lot.
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, you won't be surprised to know that I actually agree with the comments that my honourable colleague made. This is a very important bill. It is an important bill for building an economy that will create jobs and economic opportunity in every province and territory in this country. Certainly in Newfoundland and Labrador, that includes the offshore wind industry that his premier is very keen to move forward on, and certainly it's an area that we have focused on. But it's across the country. It's the battery manufacturing plant that we announced in British Columbia a few weeks ago. It's the Dow Chemical facility and the Air Products facility in Alberta. It's the Jansen Potash mine in Saskatchewan. It's the Volkswagen battery plant. It's the Northvolt plant in Quebec. It is across the country. We are building an economy that will be strong and prosperous, and we are involving and engaging Canadians in that process, something that clearly the Conservatives are not interested in doing.
The Honourable Member for Battle River Lloydminster. Battleford
Lloydminster. Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, it seems to be that these Liberals and NDP only really care about theatrics. I know that they're very disingenuous in the things that they say, and they actually don't care about energy workers. We had the Labour Minister at committee in the spring, and you want to know what he said? He said that Canada will definitely need more oil and gas workers going forward. So it's ironic that they're putting forward legislation that's going to hurt Canadians working in the energy sector, but not just the energy sector, manufacturing, agriculture, construction. There are indirect jobs that are going to be affected by this. So why is it that these NDP Liberals only care about an activist agenda instead of real Canadian workers?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources.
My goodness, Madam Speaker, how to begin? At the end of the day, this is about creating an economy that will be strong and create jobs going forward. It is not about burying your hand in the sand and your head in the sand and trying to imagine a future that actually existed 30 years ago. In order to have a relevant plan for the economy, you have to have a relevant plan for the environment. And our plan is working. At Air Products, it's 230 jobs. The Dow facility, it's 8,000 jobs during construction. The Volkswagen plant, it's 3,000 jobs and 30,000 indirect jobs. The World Hydrogen facility in Newfoundland would be 4,200 indirect jobs and 2,200 jobs during construction. The Northvolt battery facility, 3,000 people. The CCUS facilities that are going to be built in the oil sands will be thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs. RBC says that by the end of the decade, we will add 400,000 clean energy jobs on a path to net zero by the end of this decade. That is because of the investments that we are making. That is because of the plan. We are engaging Canadians in this conversation in a thoughtful way. Shame on them for trying to exclude Canadians from that conversation.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Calgary Centre.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. But I'll recall this. This is about labour. This Minister keeps saying this is about the labour that's going into Canadian manufacturing, the labour he can try and move with Canadian taxpayer dollars out of productive industries into unproductive industries that aren't making any money. This is a shift. This is a shift into provincial jurisdiction. He knows that. He knows that the federal government has no expertise here, no reason to be here because it's already being done by every one of the provinces way more effectively than the federal government could ever do. And I will cite an example here, Madam Chair. We talk about the coal transition, Canadian coal workers and communities. Well, there's a whole bunch, $185 million in funding until 2025. Where did it go? It went into consultants only. It did nothing for the coal workers. It did nothing for the communities. It got put in the pockets of Liberal insiders. And that is what this government is all about, is paying its own friends and not paying Canadians that are going to be displaced in this.
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker. Look, this is about two things. This is about ensuring that we actually have a plan to build an economy that can be strong and prosperous in a low-carbon future, and it is ensuring that we have workers that are available and equipped to succeed, to actually ensure that we are able to build those economy of the future. I would just say to the Honourable Member that he just needs to look around him at all of the different projects that are ongoing, whether that's the various electric vehicle manufacturing facilities in Ontario, the battery manufacturing facilities in Quebec, the offshore wind development in Atlantic Canada, the potash mines and the nuclear development in Saskatchewan, the Dow Chemical facility and the Air Products facility, the carbon capture and sequestration work that will be going on in the oil sands, the battery facility and the renewable diesel facility in British Columbia. It is amazing how fast this is moving, but it's moving because of deliberate public policy to encourage and incent the development of an economy that will be strong in a world that must, from a scientific perspective, be a lower carbon future. That is something that we are looking to engage engage Canadians in, we're engaging labor, we're engaging industry, we're engaging Indigenous people, and perhaps most importantly, we are engaging young people in a conversation that is so relevant to their future.
The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My understanding is we're not actually debating the bill at this point. We're debating closure on a motion that's going to move particularly quickly on this bill. And I do not debate the fact that there are various tactics being put in place by various parties in this place to slow down the business of the House. That being said, this is a bill whose action plan for sustainable jobs is still 2 years out should it get passed. And yet this motion that's being adopted or put forward with closure only gives 2 hours for debate at clause by clause. And so my question to the minister is, why is the response from this government every time they have delay tactics from the other side to go to the exact extreme to limit debate and improvements from other parties on bills as important as this one? Thank you.
Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just would correct a couple of things that my honourable colleague said. There is actually an interim action plan that's already been released for the period 2023 to 2025. What the bill does is it puts into law the requirement that you actually have these action plans going forward every 5 years. That is for the purpose of transparency and of accountability. It's a very important mechanism, just like was done in the Net Zero Accountability Act a couple of years ago. I would say that the reason why we're moving forward is because this is urgent. The world is moving. Countries around the world are moving to build that economy that is going to create jobs and economic prosperity in a low-carbon future. They are working with labor. They are working with industry to ensure that that is done. We have just gone through 5 weeks where nothing occurred at the Energy and Natural Resource Committee because the Conservatives refused to allow anything to happen. That is a shame. It is a waste of taxpayers' money. It is something that should not happen in the Parliament of Canada.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Minister was talking a lot about, in his answers earlier, about the low-carbon economy. That's good. It's something everyone wants to put forward, and I have a great deal of respect for him. But the problem is that the solutions he is proposing are bogged down in the oil and gas sector. He's talking about the blue economy and carbon capture, and no one agrees with this. When he talks about carbon capture for the oil and gas sector, we know full well it's not profitable. If taxes of Canadians pay big oil companies that bag millions of dollars per year, this funding won't be profitable. So does my colleague not agree that the best solution is just to get out of oil and gas?
Minister, in 10 seconds or less.
Merci.
Thank you very much. It's really important for us to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions across the economy and in all sectors. And of course, we have to have a plan to accelerate the economy, the green economy in all provinces and territories. It's really important. And I'd like to say that there's a hydrogen company in Quebec that used a tax credit that the government set up. So this is useful in accelerating things.
The 10 seconds are past. It is my duty to interrupt the proceedings at this time and put forthwith the question on the motion now before the House. Madame Gould.
Ms. Gould, seconded by Mr. Wilkinson, moved that in relation to the consideration of government business number 31, the debate not be further adjourned.
Les participants en personne désirent que la motion soit adoptée ou adoptée avec dissidence, ou si un député d'un parti reconnu participant en personne désire demander un vote par appel nominal, je l'invite à se lever et à l'indiquer à la présidence. Je
demande un vote par appel nominal.
agendas that will make essentials in daily life so expensive for all the rest of us that we will have no choice even when we have no options. Globalism is literally the function of numerous organizations, all explicitly heavily focused on imposing the just transition for years. And today, it's linked to the concept of the global citizen, of post-national states with no independent identities, just like the current Prime Minister said of Canada when he was elected. That's what's happening at COP28 right now. It's in the UN 2030 plan. It's a top priority of lots of many well-known and respected gatherings like the Organization for Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation and others. It's bizarre the NDP Liberals deny and attack all this now when globalism is obviously implicit in their ideology, and I thought that they're proud of it. So they've all been outraged about this, but I guess, the truth hurts, and anger is often a cover for hurt, so maybe that's what all their rage is about. Or maybe their issue is that I call it Soviet-style central planning. Except, of course, Bill C-50 really does create a government-appointed committee to advise the minister, and then the minister will appoint another committee to plan the economy. This bill doesn't mandate any of that will happen through openness and transparency. Neither of the committees will report to either Parliament or directly to Canadians along the way. I guess the coalition wants to say it's a win that the reports will be tabled in the House of Commons, but of course that doesn't guarantee any kind of debate or accountability, and they're proving their true colors through how they're handling the bill now, especially since it's clear they want to impose it all with little challenge and almost no scrutiny from beginning to end. And right, there in the summary in black and white for all the world to see, when will those plans from the government committees for Canada's economy be imposed? Every 5 years. I mean, that's literally the Soviet-preferred time frame for central planning. But somehow the NDP Liberals are shocked and outraged, even though the lead NDP Liberal minister who's at a global conference right now about the progress of the global just transition is a guy who's a self-declared proud socialist out of his own mouth in this very chamber. And there are no costs outlined either in this bill, even though it will obviously cost taxpayers, just like the NDP Liberals' mega sole source contracts for their buddies, infrastructure banks and housing funds that cost billions of tax dollars and neither build infrastructure in our houses, only bureaucracy, hundreds of thousands on consultants to tell the government to use less consultants. There will be a cost to create and maintain the Just Transition Partnership Council on pages 6 to 10 that will advise the minister, and then the secretariat the minister has to create. But this bill doesn't tell Canadians about any of the costs taxpayers will have to pay for all of that upfront and after. So it's quite something to see the inclusion of the words accountability and transparency in the long title of Bill C-50, since it's all actually about behind closed doors government-appointed committees and a minister that will cook up central plans to central plan to central plan, mandates neither transparency nor accountability directly to Canadians or through their MPs at all, and doesn't include an actual outline for one or any kind of skills or job training program at all. But that's how this whole thing was baked in the first place. Their rushed top-down schedule today is to ram it through with as little analysis from MPs and input from Canadians as possible. It's a little silly for the NDP Liberals to all be mad now that the official opposition actually wants all MPs to do our jobs, to debate, consult, amend, and approve legislation, especially such a wide-ranging and significant one like Bill C-50 and the economic transition it imposes. And what about the tens of thousands of Canadians whose jobs were devastated by these NDP Liberals' fast-track coal transition, which the Environment Commissioner said it was a total failure and left 3,400 of Canadian workers in about a dozen communities completely behind. But this government says, just trust us, for them to engineer an economic transition for 2.7 million Canadians and the entire country. Or what about the nearly 40,000 people in Newfoundland and Labrador who were all put out of work completely when they were promised the government would help them transition in the largest industrial shutdown in Canadian history at the time from cod? It was a disaster for all of them, their loved ones, their communities, their province. I hope they see Bill C-50 as the end of oil and gas Canada bill that it is too, because of course the impact of the oil and gas sector in Newfoundland and Labrador is a quarter of the province's province's total GDP, higher than Alberta's. It's 40% of Newfoundland and Labrador's exports, and 6,000 people in Newfoundland and Labrador in the oil and gas service and supply sector have lost their jobs already just in the last 3 years because of the uncertainty and the NDP Liberals' anti-energy policies. The government's intent now through C50 is like nothing Canada has ever seen before, and Canadians can be forgiven for knowing that this won't go well. What's truly bizarre about all this, though, is despite the NDP Liberals' collusion on the bill for about 2 years, I should note here that other opposition MPs like us don't actually get to see the bills until the government actually tables them. And despite what I hear really were some roundtables and consultations meetings, there isn't actually any tangible delivery of what its own proponents say it does for skills and job training. It's not in here anywhere, which is one of the many reasons Conservatives say the Natural Resources Committee must actually do its job, and most importantly, must hear from all the Canadians that it will impact. Both union and non-union workers and union leaders should be outraged about it. What really did happen with all the time and effort and money that was apparently sunk into developing it behind closed doors between 2021 and 2023? Since the bill sets up committees to plan from on high, why the heck did all of this require a law in the first place? Government and unions and businesses consult, develop plans, and report. Like, okay, go ahead. What's holding you up? Why is Bill C-50 even required for that work to happen if they all want it to? And how is this actually all the Liberal NDP government has come up with? How is any Canadian supposed to trust these guys to deliver on anything when this took all that time, meeting, and tax dollars, but there isn't even an actual plan or program in it, and it won't be for 2 years out until they even get a recommendation? It's sort of like the ITCs that the NDP Liberals keep talking about and keep bragging about as if they're doing anything in our economy right now, but actually they don't even exist at all in Canada yet. Of course, Conservatives and more Canadians know Bill C-50 really is all about the just transition, which really is all about ending oil and gas in Canada as fast as they possibly can, which the NDP Liberals have shown repeatedly after 8 years. A government, of course, that didn't want to kill the sector and all the livelihoods it sustains really wouldn't do anything differently from what these guys have done and continue to do. I mean, everyone can read it. In the 11 pages and the 21 clauses of Bill C-50, there is not one single instance of a skills or job training program. That's the truth. And now, because of the NDP Liberals, neither union nor non-union workers, in fact, no workers, no contractors, no business owners, no investors, no Indigenous owners, partners, or workers or contractors, nobody will be able to speak or be able to be heard by MPs at any remaining stage of this top-down agenda for this top-down bill. So I'll talk about some of those workers now. A couple of points. One, the reality is the biggest growth of good-paying union jobs in Canada right now is actually created by the big multinational oil and gas companies expanding and ramping up new oil, gas, and petrochemical projects in Alberta. By the same companies that made Alberta Canada's far and away leader in clean tech, renewable, and alternative energy for at least 30 years. And for the record, today, Alberta is again far and away Canada's leader in renewable energy. In fact, the investment commitments for renewables and future fuel development in Alberta have doubled to nearly $50 billion of private sector money planned, ready to invest in Alberta, since the Premier paused to set the conditions to guarantee consultation, certainty, and confidence for all Albertans while the regulator keeps taking applications. But the NDP Liberals won't admit that to you either. Yet this is where they're at. It's the major oil and gas companies leading the creation of new union jobs in Canada, but it's actually the very sector that the Just Transition agenda will shut down first. The main thing every union worker needs is actually a job. That's what's at risk. And third, the Anti-Energy Coalition also refuses to admit the fact that in Canada, it's traditional oil and gas, oil sands, and pipeline companies that are the far and away top investors in the private sector for decades and today in clean tech, environmental innovation, and renewables, among all the private sectors in Canada, excluding governments and utilities. Just like how oil and gas is still right now the top private sector investor and top export in all of Canada's economy, and the truth is nothing is posed to match or beat it anytime soon. Nothing comes close. The stakes of the anti-energy agenda imposed by the costly coalition on Canada are exceptionally grave. Some facts about the businesses that will be hurt and the workers that will be hurt the most by the Just Transition Agenda, Bill C-50. In Canada's oil and gas sector, 93% of those companies have only up to 99 employees. They're small businesses. 63% of those businesses are considered micro businesses with fewer than 5 employees. That's the truth about workers and businesses in Canada's oil and gas sector, especially the homegrown Canadian-based ones. Those aren't union businesses, although their jobs are also sustainable, and they are also higher paying with reliable long-term benefits than most jobs in most sectors. While large employers with over 500 people on payroll account for just over 1%, that's it, not 2%, just over 1% of the total oil and gas extraction businesses in Canada, that's it. Now, those are the businesses that are mostly union workplaces and support more union jobs than the rest of the sector, but they are also among the first businesses that Bill C-50's agenda will kill, and that after 8 years, the NDP Liberals have been incrementally damaging. So again, no oil and gas sector, no businesses, no jobs, unions or otherwise, that's the truth. But it also means higher costs and less reliable power, especially where most Canadians have no affordable options, like rural, remote, northern, Atlantic, prairie and Atlantic, and Indigenous communities, fewer businesses and jobs there, less money for government programs, since currently the oil and gas sector pays the most of all to all 3 levels of government, and less private sector money for clean tech and innovation. But which workers do the NDP Liberals already know that their unfair, unjust transition Bill C-50 will hurt the most? Well, if you can believe it, visible minority Canadians and Indigenous Canadians. Both ethnically diverse and Indigenous Canadians are more highly represented in the energy sector than in any other sector in Canada's economy. But the internal government leaked memo that I'm assuming they've all saw says they are expected to face higher job disruptions than any other workers, and they will have more trouble finding new opportunities. They will end up in lower paying, more precarious jobs with fewer opportunities, as will be the case for all the workers who will lose their livelihoods to this radical anti-energy global agenda. So Canadians will know instantly, of course, from these numbers that the top targets to be crushed by Bill C-50 are those 93% and those 64% of small and micro Canadian businesses, workers, and all their contractors. Bill C-50 doesn't contemplate them at all. There's no consideration about all the non-union workers who will all lose their jobs in the Just Transition Agenda, the homegrown Canadian-based known businesses with Canadian workers who have been doing their parts on environmental stewardship, innovation, clean tech, actual emissions reductions, Indigenous partnerships to the highest standards in Canada, and therefore to the highest standards in the world, just like the big guys here. Since the NDP Liberals refuse to allow it, I spoke with one of those, my office spoke with one of those union workers last week from Saskatchewan. He said, I am not happy with the fact that I will be displaced out of a job from a federal mandate. No matter what the NDP Liberals try to call it or say about it now, he's got it right. That's exactly what will happen to that union worker. There's nothing, not a single thing about all the non-union workers who will obviously all lose their jobs first, nor any space for union workers who don't want the transition accelerated by the anti-energy, anti-private sector. NDP Liberals, there's nothing about the communities and the people who will be damaged the most, nothing about what sector actually can and will replace the jobs and economic contributions of the oil and gas sector, because of course right now there's nothing that will or can, and nothing about all those hundreds of thousands of oil and gas union workers whose employers will also be put out of work quickly, as is the actual aim of Bill C-50. No wonder the NDP Liberals want to silence Canadians and do this all quickly and behind closed doors, since they too must know common sense Canadians can see right through them, and they're running out of time. A last point about the Chair of Natural Resources from Calgary Skyview. You know, when I congratulated him on his recent appointment, I said to him the Liberals have done him no favors by putting him there to help impose their agenda. The people of Calgary Skyview will render their decision, as is their right, like it is for all Canadians, in the next election. But I suspect at the end of all of this, just like I warned a former Natural Resources Minister from Alberta in our last emergency committee meeting about the TMX, which still isn't built, in the summer heading into the 2019 election, that his constituents would see his betrayal, I suspect the people of Calgary Skyview will be the same in this instance. You'll notice that member, that former Natural Resources Minister from Alberta, wasn't sent back here. And in hindsight, I suspect it won't be worth it for the member for Calgary Skyview, but we all make choices and we've all faced consequences. So I move, seconded by the member for Coast of Bays, Central Notre Dame, that the motion be amended by A, replacing paragraph A with the following. During the consideration of the bill by the Standing Committee on Natural Resources, the Minister of Natural Resources and its officials be ordered to appear as witnesses for no less than 2 hours. Members of the committee submit their lists of suggested witnesses concerning the bill to the clerk, and that the chair and clerk create witness panels which reflect the representation of the parties on the committee. And once complete, that the chair begins scheduling those meetings. 3, a press release be issued for the study of the bill, inviting written submissions from the public and establishing a deadline for those submissions, and B, deleting paragraphs B and C. And every member of this chamber has a right to an ability to prove that they actually support democracy here by supporting our amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Ms. Stubbs, seconded by Mr. Small, moves the following amendment, that the motion be amended by A, replacing paragraph A with the following. A, during the consideration of the bill by the Standing Committee on Natural Resources, 1, the Minister of Natural Resources and its officials be ordered to appear as witnesses for no less than 2 hours. 2, members of the committee submit their list of suggested witnesses concerning the bill to the clerk, and that the chair and clerk create witness panels which reflect the representation of the parties on the committee, and once complete, that the chair begins scheduling those meetings. And 3, a press release be issued for the study of the bill, inviting written submissions from the public and establishing a deadline for those submissions. And B, deleting paragraphs B and C. The amendment is in order. Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The member opposite ended her speech by speaking about consequences for actions and voters locally having the final say. So in that vein, I'm just curious, how does the member opposite think that voters in her riding feel about her voting against the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement? She spoke in her speech about Canadians needing a job, supporting small businesses.
They are still going on about this trade agreement. Oh my God.
Sector. And Madam Speaker, I would argue that that means also ensuring that the world does not have to rely on Russian oil. And all of that in the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement would help support Ukrainians fight and win for democracy. Does she think the voters in her riding are going to hold her accountable for her actions?
The Honourable Member for Lakeland.
Well, after 8 years of that government, there were 4 major oil pipeline proposals. 0 have gone forward. 1 is ballooning and ballooning and ballooning because this government chose to buy it instead of give it certainty. It's still not built. There's been 18 proposals for LNG in this country that, and not a single one is actually built. Only 1 is being constructed, and that was approved by the former government. So to be clear, Conservatives believe that what Ukraine needs is energy and weapons, which is what we just proposed, but it's because of these NDP Liberals that we can't get energy out the door to reduce dependency on Russian gas. And I appreciate that she asked me that question because, of course, married to a Ukrainian, having grown up in the cradle of Ukrainian settlement in Lakeland and representing a very Ukrainian community, I wonder what her government thinks about the fact that they really didn't give a rip about any of those Ukrainian workers and families who they put out of work with no cost analysis when they shut down the best performing immigration center in the entire country.
Questions and comments.
All right, guys, if you want to give me a like and a subscribe, it will help the channel out. And we have
you very
5
much.
minutes before I shut the channel down.
I'll ask the member to start again.
I didn't recognize them. I don't know why they're speaking right now. I would ask them to hold off. Questions
and comments. The honourable member for Jonquière. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a question that has bothered me for quite some time. I sit with my committee on the Natural Resources Committee, but I can't help but ask if, on the one hand, she recognizes that right now, in terms of the climate, we have a major problem in terms of global warming. I'd like to know if she can recognize there's a global warming issue, and also, does she recognize that the fossil fuel sector is responsible as a big emitter of GHGs for this global warming? If she recognizes this, I think that the solution that is before us is to reduce our dependency on the oil and gas sector. I'd like to hear what she has to say about that. Does she recognize climate change? Does she recognize that the oil and gas sector has a role to play in climate change? And does she recognize that we have to gradually remove ourselves from pull out of hydrocarbons?
To the member for his question, and I enjoy working with him on committee and listening to hear him in House of Commons. So to be clear, there's I think some related issues here. First of all, Conservatives want to greenlight green projects. We're going to do that by reducing timelines, reducing costs, reducing taxes, to set the conditions for the private sector to be able to propose major projects, create jobs, and fund their big projects. We also, at the same time, want to expand and accelerate traditional oil and gas in Canada and exports, particularly to provide energy security, which is our moral obligation, I think, to free democracies around the world. What the Liberals are proposing, though, is not a gradual shutdown of oil and gas in Canada. It's an ever-escalating agenda that they impose through constant changing of the goalposts and constantly new unachievable targets. But the other thing about the oil and gas sector is it is by far and away the leading private sector investor in clean tech, innovation, actual emissions reductions, habitat stewardship, wildlife preservation, reclamation. That is the sector that puts in the most private sector dollars that goes into innovation in Canada right now. It's also the major sector that contributes to the highest levels of all for government revenue for anything they may be doing on that end and on programs and services that all Canadians depend on.
Questions and comments? The Honourable for Timmins, James Bay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, certainly over the last 6 weeks, we watched a toxic gong show from the Conservatives who did not allow witnesses to come forward, who had the minister was going to come. They didn't want him. Instead, we heard about it was like watching European soccer players rolling around on the pitch. And no offense to European soccer players, at least they get in the goal once in a while. But I want to ask the member about the way she's misrepresented all these issues. Last year, we had 133 witnesses and 120 hours of hearings on clean energy, and at no point did any of those witnesses allege some kind of conspiracy, and yet this member is going public and using very loaded language about a globalist agenda. I want to know, that language for a globalist agenda, did that come from her? Did that come from her leader's office? Because that needs to be explained.
I'll let the honourable member finish in a second. I have a point of order. The honourable official opposition House Leader.
Yeah, I just would like to call the honourable member who is asking a question on relevance. He's going down some rabbit holes here and verging on unparliamentary language. So I just asked him to keep to the merit of the actual legislation without this loaded language. That
I believe this is more of a point of debate. The honourable member for Timmins, James Bay, can just wrap it up. 10 seconds.
I'd like to know where the language for globalist agenda, did she make that up? Because there's not a single witness who used such outrageous language.
For Lakeland.
So first of all, I guess I already addressed this point actually in the previous 20 minutes, so I guess the member missed that. But just to talk about misrepresentation, of course, the study that he's referring to in committee, from which there were many witnesses, by the way, none of them called it sustainable jobs, they all called it just transition, which is why the Bloc is quite rightly asking why they've abandoned that language. But that study in that committee, of course, wasn't about this bill at all, and regardless, they introduced the bill before the committee was done its report and recommendations. So the entire thing is a charade from that member. I explained the concept of globalists and globalism. This is a very normal division in political philosophy. What's happening, so what globalism is the belief that economic and foreign policy should be planned globally, internationally.
I have a point of order. The honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
The American Jewish Committee has identified globalist agenda as an anti-Semitic conspiracy group. It's not normal, only with extremists.
This is not a point of order, it's a point of debate. And I do want to remind members, if they've had an opportunity to ask questions and comments, they should, when someone else has the floor, they need to wait until I call for questions and comments if they wish to continue to contribute to the discussion. The honourable member for Lakeland, if she could wrap it up in 20 seconds.
I'll try to. Yeah, I mean, perhaps this goes back to my more than 20 years of academic background of political philosophy. The word's not new, and it is absolutely a normal ideological divide, depending on perspectives of how policy, economic, and foreign decisions should be made. So what COP28 is doing right now is, no, can I just finish? Like, he asks me the question, keeps interrupting, so could I just finish? Like,
I have asked the honourable member I've asked the honourable member to wrap it up in 20 seconds. It's been 40 seconds. So if she can wrap it up right now.
Sure.
The honourable member to please wait until there is, I go to questions and comments if he wishes to try to be recognized again. The honourable member for Lakeland, very briefly.
Maybe I'll just summarize by saying at COP28, where they are absolutely globally discussing and planning foreign and economic policy, including chief among them the just transition, maybe that member should be a little bit more worried about the fact that the host of COP28 says, quote, there's no science out there, no scenario out there that says the phase out of fossil fuels was going to achieve 1.5 degrees Celsius. And he says, you're asking for a phase out of fossil fuels. Please help me show me for a phase out of fossil fuel that will allow for sustainable socioeconomic development, unless you want to take the roll back into caves. Now, I hear them laughing because they probably have a claim to make about greenwashing, but they can't stand and justify all their decisions based on COP28 on one hand, but then litigate it on the other.
I want to allow for one more question. Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
We've listened to the honourable member for 20 minutes and questions and answers. I have the honour of sitting on the Natural Resources Committee. It was filibustered by the Conservatives members on that committee for the last 10 meetings. We've had no witnesses.
Sorry, there's another point of order. There seems to be a problem, I think, with interpretation. L'honorable député de Rivière-des-Mines. Oui. C'est correct? Ça fonctionne maintenant? Okay. The honourable member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Thank you, Madame la President. As I said, the Conservatives on the opposite side filibustered all 10 meetings we've had on Bill C-50. Constituents back home know this. The residents know this. Canadians know this. They send us here. We are paid by the taxpayers. And all the opposite side has done is waste time and resources. We could have had witnesses. The MP has used language that I'm befuddled by. Globalists. In one video, the MP says the final solution. In the video that they put out a few days ago, language that is purely, I would say, anti-Semitic. And secondly, purely wrong. So, Madame President, through you...
The honourable member to answer, because we're running out of time. Sorry, and I have a point of order. The honourable member, Calgary Centre.
Yeah. Pardon me, Madam Chairman. It's the second time I've heard that in this House of Commons, that that there's something anti-Semitic being referred to on this side of the House. Nothing could be further from the truth, and I ask that member to withdraw that comment, please.
Withdraw.
Again, I just want to remind members to be mindful, and some of the wording that is being used is obviously causing some challenges here within the House and some disorder in the House. I would ask members to be careful on that. I don't know if the honourable member, I have another point of order. The honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Yes, Chair. I'd ask you to talk with the clerk about whether or not the term globalist has been defined as an anti-Semitic term. It has been, and it's very, very disturbing that we have misinformation that it's not. It is defined as an anti-Semitic conspiracy trope.
Le langage, oops. Okay. No. Order. There's some cross debate going on. I just want to say, like, I've been listening to the conversations. The wording that was used wasn't directly to a member. It's the language that is being used that is causing some disorder in the House. And although it's not being used directly to a member, I would ask members to be very careful. I will allow the honourable member for Lakeland to answer because I've been trying to give the honourable member some signal to tell him that he was going over the time allotted for the question. And so I will allow the honourable member for Lakeland to answer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, all I would say to that member who was sort of in and out of the committee is that, of course, on October 30th, when they tried to dictate the schedule for the committee, for the bills, Conservatives immediately countered with a compromise solution on the schedule. And then the NDP Liberals spent an entire month preoccupied and obsessed with censoring and kicking out Conservative members so that we couldn't represent our constituents. That's why we're here today. But what I hope Canadians can see is the very clear alternative vision here. One is the end of oil and gas and everything that goes with it. One is a top-down central planning of the economy with no transparency, no accountability, no clarity to Canadians about how much this has cost to date, how much it's going to cost in the future. This is very much the private sector versus the government philosophical divide. That's what's at play here, and this is without a doubt the end of days, the culmination of 8 years of anti-energy, anti-private sector, anti-development policy by this government.
Okay, and I'm still hearing some conversations out there or some individuals trying to put some input in, I think, but I would just ask members if they want to have conversations to take it outside, and if they have questions and comments to hold off until the appropriate time. Reprise de débat. Resuming debate. Reprise de débat, l'honorable député de Jonquière.
The honourable member for Jonquière. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm very pleased to rise. I will start by saying that I will not be sharing
All right, everybody, I am shutting down, so
I'd like to sum up the
I don't know what channels you want to go to, but go to anyone you want. I'm shutting down this channel, and I will see you live tomorrow.
Where it's become impossible for the Natural Resources Committee.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to help the channel.
I would say that, first of all, Madam Speaker, it's a little bit like what we saw last week with C-234. Last week with C-234, we spoke extensively in this House about what I call the Carleton method, the method used by the new leader of the official opposition, which mainly rests on intimidation and misinformation. And last week I was saying that those who, the first to tell us about the Carleton method were Quebec Conservative MPs, in fact, those who did not support the member for Carleton during the leadership race, because they knew very well that very often